Oh, we have to
Yeah, let's
quit
just
it.
get out of here. Yeah. Did you didn't do anything?
I don't think so. If I did, I have it still on my
good.
computer. So
Honestly, I mean, that's the same one I have.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I know I have one at the office as well.
Okay.
So we'll use the same clicker.
All right, perfect.
And the only thing that's different is this guy. Sure, this gets up first.
Every time she comes,
Are all these lights on one bank? This, if you turn that out, shoot in the dark. These lights are they all on one bank?
It's the PowerPoint.
Well, we could probably see it. I don't. Retain anything here. Okay, keep your hands to yourself.
This is gonna be. I worked on my PowerPoint as like from 2007 or maybe earlier version. I hope it shows up okay.
At least we're not going the other direction. That's usually when you run into bigger problems.
What's that?
When you're going down, and so if we had 2007 and you worked on 10, then that might be a problem.
Oh yeah. Computers. I have.
You can all move up a little bit.
What?
Artistophobia.
You think we can have less light, or is this pre-talk light?
Less light?
Yeah.
Can we have less light?
Yeah.
Oh,
is
sure,
it-
we can have less light. We won't be able to see you.
You don't even see me because it's gonna.
Well, no.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
What?
It's fine with me. You know what? We could. But where do you want us? Midnight at the Oasis. Mm-hmm. Sure, we can do all things. Not good. Turn them off. Well, I know. I had the same thing too. I wanted to keep as much light off the screens as possible. That's
Yeah.
why we have a black box theater where we should all be in. Right?
Yeah, these meetings are never in the black box. I never know that.
Oh yeah, this is better. Ooh, I'm gonna do this.
We still got an experience yard.
Oh, is that working?
before you fire this PowerPoint up, I want to show them something on the net.
Okay.
Sure.
Can I square this away on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you mind going to slide 4 just to see?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, there it is. There was no image before.
No, yeah. Well, I can tell you why, but
It's still
actually-
stretched out. It's weird.
Let's see if
Maybe if it. Yeah, it's not. It's still like wide. It's not supposed to be.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Let me see. This is the only. Seems to be. Is this going automatically? Oh no. Okay. Okay. We need, can you get this adjusted so it's stretching things out right now? Is this, can we get it
This is
set
a
up?
WXGA
Yeah,
projector.
can we get it so it's not wide?
Yeah, let's try.
I can move.
Does it look okay?
No, it's
It doesn't? It's still wide?
It's still wide. Yeah.
Is that better? XGA?
No.
That's good.
Is it? How wide is it? Extremely wide?
It's pretty wide. I mean, it should be
This doesn't look too bad.
really the
Not having seen it before, but
Yeah.
looking at the text, I wouldn't know that it was wide.
Yeah, it's really wide.
Is it?
Yeah. We're gonna begin. I'd like to thank Cedarville Gallery, of course, and Cherith and Josh and John for just being so like amazing. And this was like a really, I just feel really privileged to be able to have a show here, have had a show here, and I'd just like to thank everybody at the school. So thank you, and thank you for all being here. And I'm going to, this lecture is kind of divided into chapters or sections, if you will, and that's kind of often how I think about my work too. So I thought this format made sense. First one is intuitive practice of the skeptic, and all the sentences or phrases that are in italics, aside from the title of any of the work that I'm showing, that you can think of them as thought bubbles, in a sense. And here it says, will harmful discoveries result from exploration? So there continues to be a conscious skepticism placed in this temperate practice of intuition under the scrutiny of public practice, wherein I am likely to be asked more questions to which I am to have less answers. While wholly ideal of one of the aspirations of younger artists resides in the hope of something new, of creating something new, I am a realist, but I'm not immune to this common hope. I reason that newness is partly embodied in the otherness and the strange. These characteristics of newness, by default, are not seen within the world one considers familiar, and for me, that world is in art. The exploration that involves miring myself in the disseminations of art feels harmful to new discoveries. All right. Parrots. Parrots was never intended to be a painting. It started with a found photograph that was rephotographed later to be set against rectangular divisions through Photoshop, printed and mounted to a piece of plexiglass, finally to be mounted on the wall. Once this flat image object was completed, it became clear something was not quite right, meaning in this instance not enough had happened to it. Simultaneously, while it was not clear precisely what had to be done, gradually small parts of the print were peeled and scraped away to be replaced by a coat of textured paint and several layers of latex paint. The modification was unplanned, unforeseen, yet necessary, and gave an important clue to what united Parrots and all the work made since 2009, and that was the importance of surface. Initially, Parrots did not satisfy its need for the kind of attention to surface that its companion work, Parrots 2, shown here, demanded. The surface specific to Parrots engages its surroundings as defined by Parrots 2, the sculpture, yet is not bound to the ethics of space, and no other iteration in terms of the work's installation would be possible outside of one particular space. Surfaces. Are ornamentation and decoration different? I might say that Chopin's music is ornamental, but never decorative. So 2 types of surface are of interest to me. The skin, in ways of well-tailored suit, is very much the dandy. Another surface is the robe, and it cannot wait to disrobe, fashions itself. The flasher knows underneath something else lurks. The 19th century dandy is the Baudelairean ilk, whose high-mindedness and its aristocracy insists on the autonomy of its being beyond external embellishment, but is absent of vulgarity, owing to the poise of the dandy. And I'm going to read you a little quote from Baudelaire's The Painter of Modern Life. These beings have no other status but that of cultivating the idea of beauty in their own persons, of satisfying their passions of feeling and thinking. Contrary to what many thoughtless people seem to believe, dandyism is not even an excessive delight in clothes and material elegance. For the perfect dandy, these things are no more than the symbol of the aristocratic superiority of his mind. Despite his dedicated stance that decried ornamentation and designing for the bourgeois elite, Adolf Loos in his architecture and even in his dress display equal disposition towards both the skin and the robe. Perhaps aesthetics resides somewhere in between the two. Painting and sculpture. So I'm going to talk about what happened between 2007 and 2008. After having been in Chicago since 2000, I left for New York in April 2007 for 13 months, and it was in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, that I re-engaged in painting. I had free access to a woodshop nearby and worked at a restaurant in Williamsburg, just a 20-minute walk away from my apartment. During the innumerable walks, one witnessed the conditions of real estate bubble at its height just before the market collapse, where old buildings were quickly torn down to make way for new condominiums to be built on every available square inch in the neighborhood. I was looking at the formal qualities of hovels and buildings in mid-construction, both conditions that implied and informed my interest in illustrating destabilized objects in the paintings that materialized in a series entitled New Untitled for 8 months. And this is one of the paintings from that series that you can't see because it's really black, but there are images on it essentially. They all had this matte background, and the image had a glossy, it was painted with glossy black paint, and you could see this half reflection of yourself if you're standing in front of the painting. I'm sorry you can't see what's going on there. With a limited palette and through a categorical dependence on the materiality of paint, the space represented in the series confirmed self in the empirical sense by way of its viewers' participation. The subjects of the paintings have a physical uniform sheen over them which subtly reflect all surrounding information on themselves, enabling the viewer to witness herself within that reflection. This concern for a complete experience of space and time arose primarily from my desire to enable and underline the fact that perception is a process of performance enacted through a viewer's engagement with my paintings. Around this time, my work was gaining the heft that my apartment, which doubled as my studio, was no longer able to contain. I was back in Chicago in June of 2008 and moved into a street-level apartment unit that also served as a workspace. It was there that my work started to conform to the studio's architectonic and light conditions. I was nostalgic for Brooklyn's unadorned landscape and the expanse of Los Angeles, my hometown, and settled in an isolated area of Pilsen that summer, a neighborhood south of downtown Chicago that exhibited its industrial past and present. And that was a lucky transition that allowed me to reconsider my practice that was at the time heavily invested in perception and space. So Lib, just to explain what you're seeing, it's the panel it's a square panel, like 48 by 48, that's sitting on the floor, and it's that edge is butted right up against a wall, and I painted two trapezoids, so a trapezoid on the panel and on the wall. So when you look at it from a certain angle or distance, it makes a square. I recounted the trip to Marfa I had taken earlier that year, studied the sepia backgrounds of the 17th century Dutch still life works, read Robert Irwin's writings, and reacquainted myself with Ed Richet's work. I started to remove image from my paintings and to find ways to subvert what I could not remove. Under the belief that a hierarchy projected correctness, I try to remove the image first from the canvas, then the canvas from the wall. I began to think of ways to utilize all spaces that a viewer is confronted with the moment she walks into a room with the intention of seeing a work of art. The problem I repeatedly encountered with painting was that I tended to deal with a different sort of reality when working on it, and that this reality didn't seem to have much to do with the real-time reality. There's a pictorial reality which gives painting a sort of honesty, and there its painter is dealing with the so-called real-time reality while she paints, but that reality pertains to the act of painting rather than painting itself. So 2009, that's when I started graduate school. During the period of transition of my work from painting to sculpture in 2008, the latter presented a platform in which the concerns I grappled with in painting could easily be transferred in terms of materiality of paint, spatiality, constructing appropriate canvas for appropriate image, and continued to be dealt without what I perceived to be the burden of a painting's history. In painting, every color or gesture seemed to put itself under steady scrutiny of the history of painting and necessitated an occasion for me to define them. The image in my painting tended to be about nothing, as in the image was not a depiction of a thing out in the world or of an event, but the image on a panel or canvas as a whole was rather the thing itself. Perhaps it was acknowledged then, but in hindsight, the objectification of painting was sculpture, and with that came a sweeping acceptance of the object. It was easier to think about painting through sculpture. The phenomenology that Robert Irwin investigated in the 1960s in his dot paintings, lights, scrims, and space provides the partial impetus for Untitled, Log in 2 Boxes from 2009. There are as many truths in perception as each truth is perceived by its perceiver. These individualized perceptions vary in their proximities from my own, but remain true to one's truth regardless. I had no idea how the work would be perceived. I had not considered how a body and a set of eyes other than my own would engage a sculptural work in three-dimensional terms. Untitled Log in 2 Boxes proposes an active sculptural engagement, the way it might be looked at when viewed from multiple angles, as well as the continuous perspectival shifts according to the movement of the viewer. Each color plane of each box is subverted by the lighting conditions at the time of the installation. The white, for example, can seem a pale violet or green. The unstable nature of uncontrolled color theory in action looks towards the 2 boxes and the log for a grounded reading, then to be faced with the rejection for the reading, and the box's underside floats. So the boxes have a little float underneath them. You can't really see very well in the slides. With Untitled Log in 2 Boxes, I had not yet considered the container nor expanded the viewing conditions of the room. I believed this work was about itself, and from that belief, there was no occasion to address anything outside of itself, contrary to thoughts given to light and movement. I felt an affinity upon the completion of Untitled Log in 2 Boxes for the multiple truths, but the affinity was soon replaced by weariness of the friendliness and all-inclusiveness I perceived to be specific to Robert Irwin's projects. From this point on, my work began to long for covert misbehavior and anxiety. 5, tethered the photograph and sculpture. So what the photographic image presents is a vast number of narrative possibilities because, for the most part, the image is single edition and comes to me as a ready-made. The ready-made not unlike the wall on top of which the image hangs. It isn't that the image always has to be on the wall. It cannot be of the wall since I find the distinction between the image and architecture very generative and useful place for my work. Through the image's engagement with the wall and the room, and sculpture resides in the latter, I've started to understand how to activate the image space that felt previously stagnant in my painting. 5A, the objectified photographic image. The resultant is the same for each image. The image has been objectified. A photograph is already fiction, is beholden to its own fiction, but what is done onto and around the image has no regard for the ready-made fiction. It isn't so much that my interests lie in the restaging of the photograph's history, for what I want to do with its image is to generate an unintended version, to give it a new context from its prior self. Parrots and Untitled. Parrots, so you saw that earlier in the talk, and Untitled Cockatoo, which is what you see here, display a distrust in the idea of completion. Perhaps this unwillingness to commit to permanence contributes to the mythologizing of the photograph, not necessarily in where or how it came to be as an object, but in what might possibly be happening in the image. Taken at face value, where it is sometimes fetishized, each image has new narrative forced upon it or is re-photographed. I have been drawn to each photograph's unspecified situation. It's easy to evaluate the image based on the photograph's production qualities and location of purchase. In the case of Rope, which you will see later, those conditions are discernible and of lasting value. But often what keeps me interested in the found photograph is that there is no way to know for sure how the image came about or what the image really is. I'm reacting crudely to this uncertainty by wanting to articulate the unfamiliar. And I'll also read a quote by Gerd Richter from the book Daily Practice of Painting. When I paint from a photograph, conscious thinking is eliminated. I don't know what I'm doing. My work is far closer to the informal than to any kind of realism. The photograph has an abstraction of its own, which is not easy to see through. The unfamiliar affords me great freedom to treat the image as I wish. This is the only place in my work where I consciously exert a type of control that I am unable to put towards other materials that are used for sculpture. The photograph is at times an image, at other times it is an object. I often do not understand the image. Nevertheless, the image remains factual and I believe it. I claim responsibility for the image as I use it, but I am not beholden to its history. 5B, source cinema. My reading of the photographic image is based on cinema, literature, and art history. Here, the photograph is a ready-made. Since finding a way to include photographic images in my work, I have most frequently thought about Jetée, Death in Venice, Walkabout, Don't Look Now, and Dead Ringers, films whose narrative complexities largely rely on the meandering networks of pathways on land and water, thereby causing disorientation in their travelers. Asymmetries and willing explorations are also found in children's playground layout and equipments, and even more so in the connotation of the jungle gym. The casual relationship between the centerless and asymmetry, play, and exploration is staged in Untitled and Untitled Cockatoos. I kept track of Don Sutherland's frantic travels that took me all over Venice, only to find, by the end of Don't Look Now, that I had returned to the city's map, to an uneven and irregularly woven networks of hideaways and circuitous one-way streets. In the planning stages of Untitled and Untitled Cockatoos and Parrots 2, the preoccupation with the zigzag and crisscross of Don Sutherland's travels took precedence over the making of objects or any visual evidence that would serve as catalyst for the preoccupation, even if that meant not producing anything at all. The iteration of the zigzag would invariably materialize in sculptural and pictorial forms. This, however, was the first time I can remember working intuitively without plans. The sourced image of the cockatoos provided multiple narratives that I attribute to its found and adopted reality. The photograph possesses a complete image without captions, indistinguishable from the oral effects of a foreign language spoken that is pleasing to the ear but is mostly incomprehensible in meaning. 5C, source literature. It's difficult at times to explain the how of how an idea develops or how an object takes its form subsequent to the completion of a project. What type of reasoning is at work in the studio? In varying degrees, there are emotional, aesthetic, or intellectual adjectives that I assign to an image. These adjectives hang themselves in long ropes or are tethered tightly to the image. The adjectives can only be determined by my own concurrent, therefore historical knowledge, undoubtedly reflective of my social and cultural exposure and biography. For example, at the time of purchase, the photographic source for parrots had the words double and twin attached to it. My work of the last 2 years have taken these turns, occupied with unanticipated growth that at times operates similar to a tumor yet to be ruled benign or malignant. Mutation is what I see in the parrot's photograph and in parrots too, but I am ultimately unable to substantiate how the realization of the latter form comes to be. Moments in literature also serve similar function in my work to that of films. Whereas Don't Look Now explored time, space, and travel, it is the editorial coldness and decidedly ruptured asocial lifestyle in Masok's Venus in Furs that influenced the suite of work centered around Rope, which is the work you see here. As a concentrated artificial light casts a dramatic shadow on the dying bird of paradise, the black and white image printed on yellowing paper recalls film noir's routinely paranoid isolation of the subject as seen in its film stills, or for example, in the tableau of, I don't know how to pronounce their names, František Jurdičko and Jaromír Funke, that proliferated in the avant-garde photography of the post-World War I Europe. The title Rope is copied from the notation on the back of the photograph and is presumably written by its photographer, the first word of which may be translated to mean cries in Swedish. The plant's fading decadence captured in isolation makes visible the migratory results from its familial origin in South Africa to the genus's debut in the late 18th century Europe, onto which my projection concerning the power relationship between the captor/photographer and the plant is grafted. The pervasive coldness occurring throughout Venus in Furs, the perversion that emerges in the act of rarefying an organism and objectifying the defiance of the plant subject takes me to Austria, the birthplace of Masok, the author of Venus in Furs. The key element in masochism is in the complete dissolution of control and the relationship between the controlled and the controller. The masochist, or the controlled, suffers greatly in the hands of his mistress, but he is in fact responsible for drafting the contract that specifies the control to be carried out by his mistress. She must then sign and follow its rules. The masochist is in charge of the torture as much as the mistress. For me, based on the stylistic evidence and the resulting image steeped in a type of perversion that I try to describe, the Central European origin of the bird of paradise photograph is beyond doubt. Another useful source of perversion is seen in the work of Austrian architect and designer Adolf Loos, whose ornamental and highly fetishized surfaces, while remaining cold, therefore cruel, stands as antithesis to his absolutist rejection of ornamentation. He wrote a book called Ornamentation and Crime, so you could kind of figure out how he felt about ornamentation. And Loos's and Massock's particularly Austrian sensibilities inspired my choice to further elaborate on the photograph in ways to extract an anxiety perpetrated by perversion of my authorship. So just to quickly explain what's happening in the top left-hand side corner, it's a really, really small bar. It's called American Bar. That was called Kantner's Bar before that. And it's really small, but there's mirrors running all along like the walls of the bar, so you just get this infinite picture of the ceiling when you walk in there, and it's just really incredibly beautiful space. And the bottom, it's just glassware that he designed. They're really simple in form and they're really heavy, and the bottom is there's like a sort of a scored visual information. It just kind of looks like a grid that's been kind of stretched in weird ways. And I wouldn't actually, I used what was supposed to be the champagne flute. It doesn't have a stem, and I found it interesting because you have to hold it in your hand so your drink gets warm. So you have to like drink it really fast. FYI. So this is art history. It's just a short list of people and images that I compiled that I'm just gonna go through pretty quickly. And I'm sure everybody has a huge list of people that they like to look at, and I do too. And I left out a lot of people that I thought you would already know, unless but I kept some because they were really important to me. So there's Dagobert Pesce. He's an Austrian designer that was part of the Vienna workshop that was founded by Joseph Hoffman, and that movement was sort of like Vienna's equivalent to Art Nouveau, and Adolf Loos actually was part of that. He started off as part of that group, and then he split and said ornamentation was not modern. Manfred Pernice, Scott Burton, Rachel Harrison, Heimo Zobernig, Agnes Martin, Frederick Kiesler. He's an architect, designer, exhibition designer. He was responsible in curating the exhibition display for the show that was put on at MoMA called "The Art of This Century," which happened in the last century, and he made like specific devices to hang paintings on for the viewer to sit and all of that. So he like essentially designed everything. Robert Ryman. I think the Rymans that they have up at the Art Institute is probably my favorite Ryman that I'll ever see. I was completely taken away. And also, have you been to the Art Institute to see this? And you know how like when like the work kind of looks out into the park, into the Frank Gehry, like his Millennium Park, and I had never seen the park like that before. That like it was Renzo Piano, the architect, had essentially treated the park as if it were sculpture, and like that was a really just kind of shocking conversation between Robert Ryman and Renzo Piano with Frank Gehry. So I thought that was pretty amazing too. Amy Knoebel, of course, Martin Boyce, Isa Genskin, Thomas Schutte. I think this is like I really like funny art. Maybe you can't tell, but this is probably the funniest work that I've seen him make. It's just watermelon, and they vary in size. Sometimes they're really huge, and they're really hilarious. Richard Arschwager, Alina Alina. Yeah, she's this Polish artist, and her work is really amazing. When I was writing my thesis, my advisor was trying to push me to talk about female artists, like canonical female artists, and how I see my work in this in that lineage. And all the names that she was bringing up, I just could not relate to them, like Eva Hesse, Louis Bourgeois, and Lee Bonikou, because I felt that their work was really emotionally messy in ways that my work wasn't. I think there is some sort of sexuality embedded in my work, not so much in the body of work that you see here, but I just could never really relate to where they were coming from. I think also because I knew so much about their biographies, and it just felt so painful. And I don't know anything about her biography, honestly, but I could tell that she comes from an equally messy place, but somehow I really connect with her work. Martin Barre. Natalie Dupesquier she's a textile designer mostly, who was part of the Memphis Italian design group in the 80s that were, it's like, and yeah, she did a lot of this inspired by like African fabric and of course like postmodernist architecture and design. Kirchner. Robert Mallet Stevens is a designer, but in particular I found this chair very interesting because I saw the images before I read the name of the chair, and I thought the frame was made of wood, and even after reading the name of the chair I couldn't figure out where the steel part of it was, and I realized that the owner of this chair had let the frame oxidize, so the metal had gained this kind of richness of like old polished wood, and it really kind of struck me. And of course like the lushness of the leopard skin stretched over like upholstery is like really striking too. Bruno Munari, he's an Italian designer, visionary. Like he did everything. He's sort of like the Italian equivalent of the Eames, and like this was designed for children, and I really love the importance of play in Italian design. So and he made a bunch of books and drawings, and they're all really amazing. Kurt Schwitters, his Merzbau, and Marsden Hartley, American painter, and particularly his German officer paintings, which he made a series of paintings that is now called German officer paintings, and this is one of the paintings from that body of work. And also later when he returned to the States, I think he lived in Maine, and he made these really kind of devastating small-scale landscape paintings. They're all very good. Archigram, a British architectural firm in the 60s that employed a lot of the psychedelic imageries of the era. And also Super Studio, kind of same thing, but they're Italian. And some of that table for sure I know is in production. That square table, I've seen it at Luminaire, which is a store in downtown. And Oldenburg, who I used to love in high school, and then when I went to college, I decided that I hated fun. And I thought his work was too fun, and I dismissed him for a really long time, and then I came around eventually. And this is like an earlier installation that he did. It's called Rooms, and I think it's from 1964. And this, I like it. I like that. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but there's this like sort of certain trashiness to like Swedish designs sometimes, and that really comes through in this, and with the upholstery, and I really love it. I kind of find it funny. So that's that. And Pucci is, Emilio Pucci is his label. It was founded in 1947, and I really love looking at their scarves, actually, because they all are like heavily invested in like allegory and like psychedelia, and all the images are just like really rich and amazing and beautiful. And this is a website I really like to look at. It's called Architecture for Kinder, and it's based in Switzerland, and it has like a really incredible collection of playgrounds in like all stages of completion, all budget. Like the image on the top left-hand side corner, that is like a model that Noguchi made. I don't think that park was ever built, but they just have all these amazing sources, mostly in English and then some in German. So I like to go there and look at playgrounds a lot, because it helps me think about sculpture, just traveling in space, and it helps me locate my body in these like images, and I don't know, think about sculpture. And I also like this website a lot. It's Phillips Dupuy is it's a high-end auction house, and just any kind of high-end thing that you can imagine, whether it be art or furniture, they'll do it. And they have all their catalogs online, so you can look through any of them. And I'm particularly interested in exhibition displays, and in this case they always build these platforms whenever they're showing furniture, and as if they were like in conversation, that they're somehow like you as like a potential buyer are supposed to be able to envision the life that you might be able to have with this in your house. So I like that, like chairs facing each other and whatnot. And so like this is a material that I've used a lot, which is the vinyl composition tile that are also in the show. And I'm interested in material that can be bought at hardware stores, something that is something that I consider democratic, because they can be purchased, they're made cheaply, they're generally available for a larger demographic of consumers. And I find it really curious when a lot of these things are supposed to mimic something that they're not, such as like marble and granite, and then they turn into something else. I think that's the place of mutation that I find really interesting for my work too. So I use them. And this is a contact paper, for instance, for like kitchen countertops. And they have gray, black marble, green marble, and brown granite. All right, now we're going to talk about architecture very briefly. So as seen in Untitled and Untitled Cockatoos, and in Parrots and Parrots 2, the image is never without its counterpart in the form of an object, and the two always try to be an acknowledgement of each other as well as of the interior, the site of their installation in some capacity. For example, I had an opportunity to try out the installation of Parrots and Parrots 2 3 times at Julius Caesar, a gallery in Chicago's West Side, and the GBU, a student-run gallery at UIC, with an untitled third element that would be painted directly on the wall that changes position, form, and tone according to location. So you can't, like in the middle and the top right-hand side corner image that you see, there's like a little strip of gray that's painted right in the corner, and I had lit it so that it looked like a shadow. And then on the left-hand side corner, the parrots is actually resting directly on top of the gray rectangle that is painted on the wall. The role of this absent third has been to reinforce parrot's relationship to the wall in the thesis exhibition space, which is shown on the bottom right-hand side corner. You can't see it, but where it's black, that's actually a column. One column shared the same wall with the painting and served the function previously assigned to the gray strips and rectangle of the untitled third. Architecture, to me, activates space. It's the container that can be inhabited by people and objects alike, the same people and objects within architecture evolving according to the conditions of quote-unquote real time. To rephrase my concerns in 2008, the problem I seemed to encounter with painting was paintings. Time existed independent of the palpably felt currency of a physically engaged and occupied building. At the time, my painting employed a heavy-handed historicization of painting, the task that started to forbid any joy in the act of making. I was unable to address with painting the physical and time-based needs that had been surfacing in my work. I began to notice a painting's activation by the wall on which it hung and identify the wall plane that begins immediately outside the perimeter of the image as a site I wanted to pay attention. Untitled and Parrots 2 are skeletal in nature in order to invite a kind of looking through, a frequent repositioning of the participant's or the viewer's body caused by a lack of center and symmetry in the sculptures. These works tie image to architecture, architecture to sculpture, and sculpture to image, the three conditions that establish a conscious space activated by time. Ultimately, this activation relies on the human body and its presence and scale. The activation is relative to the consciousness invoked, particular to the viewer. So this is sort of a very brief conclusion. I wanted to end tonight's talk, which tracks most aggressively the work made between 2009 and 11, on a hopeful note. Hopeful for the intuitive process in art, for seeing the value in circuitous and circular thinking, for a personal practice that is constant, that's a constant exercise and test in the unburdening of habits, and for believing that there is no end in sight, this being the most terrifying, potentially harmful, and ultimately the most productive place I choose to operate myself and my work. And now I'd like to show you a series of photographs I took of Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion in the span of 2 hours during the summer of 2010. They're presented here in the order that they were taken, accepting the close-ups of stones prominently used in the pavilion, which is shown in the last slide. All right, that's it. Thanks. So, yeah, if you have any questions about anything, you can ask me. I'll try my best to answer. One thing I will tell you that I learned in grad school is that it's okay to say no. Like, this happened when, during crits, people will be asked questions that they they had no answers to, and they still try to answer anyway and end up sounding really bad because they didn't know what they were talking about. One of the professors said, you know, it's totally okay to say no, like if you are not ready to answer this question. I'm not saying this is what you should do in your class, but you know, just so that you know. But anyway, any questions? Anything about grad school, about the work here or over there? Yeah.
You said you didn't like fun.
I didn't like fun, I said? Yeah.
Yeah. What did you?
I don't know. I just became. She said that I said I didn't like fun, and what did I mean by that? And I just got really into like AbX and like really serious art, and I loved pop art, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and I like really identified with a lot of work that came out of California, just like the sense of space and all of that just really made sense being there. Like Ed Richet's work, I don't even, it doesn't have to be explained to me. I just get it. But then there was just like, it was all like forms and colors. At least at that time, that's how I perceived that work, like pop art, stuff that I really liked when I was in junior high and high school. And then I just got into this like real serious space, and I couldn't make, there was no space for me to like what I liked in high school. But then now, you know, it's all changed, and I'm really all over the place now. But that's what I meant, you know, yeah. And it was, I remember also, I've always liked Mondrian, not that his work is very serious, but I'd only seen his work in print until I came to Chicago in 2000 to go to the Art Institute, and it was really shocking to encounter his work in person because it was so built up. There was so much paint, it was like cracking, and you could see where he had changed his mind, all of that. So I remember that being a really kind of important moment, even though that doesn't really have much to do with, now I'm digressing, but yeah. I'm just recalling, how did I get from like fun to that? But I think it's fun. I think Mondrian's fun, you know. Anything else?
Can you dumb it down for me maybe about like what it is you're trying to do with the final photographs and
Well, I mean, it's,
like the pieces that you're making?
sure.
Just because I had a hard time following some of this stuff, I wish I could.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Well, listen, so well, the photographs here in the show operate, I realize that they operate in a really different way, because I don't think I'm not objectifying these here as much as I was like in my older work, where there was like a direct relationship to like sculpture and painting in the photographs, the way they were handled and the way they were hung. But these are, these are almost like documentation photos. So I came across a whole batch of photos from this furniture company based in New York in the 50s. And these were all like, you know, photographs of their products and from like a certain season. And they just had tons and tons of like photo images of chairs and setups, the way they had, you know, things like that. And I just wanted to present them as like documents rather than as like objects. So like so they're just simply framed in this case. But so what do you want me to clarify?
Well, I mean, you talked about you know, the idea that photographs sort of carry this kind of history or something like that.
Yeah.
And at times it seemed like you were saying that maybe the structures that you're creating that are sort of responding
Yeah.
maybe at times in sort of formal ways. Like I see the
Yeah.
parents as having some sort of like formal sort of associations happening.
For sure. I mean, there was a lot of my.
Like kind of actively like jettison that history or like distance yourself from that history. So I guess I'm kind of like wondering like what's that about? Like what?
I mean, it's just I think I responded differently to different images. Honestly, that's why that's why I think like I began by saying I began with the chapter intuitive practice of the skeptic. You know, like I did. Since these were all found photographs, and I was so like drawn to them. Like the first image that I like picked up that kind of did that to me were the images of the cockatoos, the 4 cockatoos kind of hanging on this bar, and you couldn't really see them here, but they were all like on this bar, like metal bar, hanging out, and they're all chained to the bar, like they're like literally chained to like whatever they were standing, and I immediately associated that image with La Jetée, because there's a scene where they go to the Museum of Natural History, and also the movie was really helpful for me to like think about because it's composed mostly of stills, and there's a small bit in the movie where a little bit of movement happens when one of the protagonists is like, or when this guy is remembering his girlfriend or somebody, and she's like breathing as she's sleeping, and that's like the only part where things are in motion. But anyway, like I just was able to. That's just immediately where I went for some reason. That's the association I had. I made with that particular image to that film, and so I just went with it, and then I started finding other images, like the parrots image, where it's actually an image of 2 parrots, but the way they're photographed, it just looks like it's like a one parrot that's been kind of split into 2, and then I, you know, like it was for me at least like I'm like, oh, yeah, of course I'm gonna think about Cronenberg with this in Dead Ringers. It's a movie that came out in the 80s, directed by David Cronenberg, and it stars Jeremy Irons, and he plays his twin. Like they're twins in this movie. They're these really creepy doctors. It's like, I think the caption of the movie poster is something like 2 bodies and 1 soul or something like that. So like I think it changed, but I was trying to harness like what I thought was creepy or strange in each of the image, because that's sort of like the running theme of the ropes, parrots, and the cockatoo images, because so ropes was that image of that plant that was framed in this brass plated zinc, and I just thought it's a really tiny image. It's about like, I don't know, it's about like 2 by or like 3 by 5. It's a really tiny photograph, but I just thought that I just recognized in that image all these sort of Central and Eastern European avant-garde like photographic works that I had seen, like, you know, like post-World War I stuff, where shapes and shadows, lightings, all of these things were really exaggerated and strange. Looking at a lot of photogram too, and I just so like that's what I meant by like sort of implanting or like making up a story for the photo, because I mean I kind of had an idea what the image might be, but you know, I was never sure, and it just felt like a good place for me to make the kind of work that I wasn't able to make before. Yeah.
You used the word ethics, and you've used it in other places.
Yeah.
That's a really big word.
I know, it's okay.
What
I
does
will
that mean for you?
for me. Okay, so like this work is really different from the work at the gallery right now. Is really different from the work that I've made even like 6 months ago or something. And when I mean by like ethics, things being bounded by like ethics of space, I was doing a lot of site-specific works and like sculpturally, and I thought, and at one point I realized like, am I really comfortable with saying that this work can only go here? And my answer to that was, and it still is, no. So I try to figure out ways to deal with that. That was an ethical dilemma for me. So it's like, well, one solution, or it seems like a solution, but who knows, maybe I'll feel differently about it in a while. I figured if I like built a platform and put everything on it, then it could go anywhere, and I wouldn't have to worry about things being so tied to one particular space. Yeah, I didn't like that. I didn't like to think that one thing could only go in one place, because just in reading about Bauhaus and the term total work of art, where the designer or artist is in charge of creating every single thing in the room, like down to, I don't know, like everything, you name it, like silverware. And I just didn't, it just felt really kind of, what's the word? Stifling almost, and I just didn't like it. So that's why I started adding casters, like wheels, to my work, but they weren't really functional either, because I would only put 2 wheels on like one side, so things had to be dragged. I didn't really like the idea of claiming that everything was mobile either, so like things never really moved too freely either. Yeah. Anything? You can ask me about anything. School stuff,